First of all, good afternoon. I would like to welcome all our audience, to thank everyone that has joined this another session from Air Networking Fridays. Today we have a very interesting presentation by Sergio Rossi. My name is Eduardo Pereira. I'm coming from IBS Institute and ISISE at the University of Minho. Thank you for participating. First of all, to thank Air Center for all this logistics and for all this work. We have been having a series of web conferences or web networking Fridays, very interesting. Second, to thank to Sergio Rossi to be here with us today. I will just briefly introduce Sergio. He is a research scientist specializing in marine natural resources and biological oceanography. He is associate professor at DiSTeBA at the University of Salento, and visiting professor at the Universidade Federal de Ceará in Brazil. He's also invited researcher at Environmental Science and Technology Institute in Barcelona, Spain. It's a very big pleasure to have you with us today. Before we start, I would like to give just 2 or 3 brief notes. First, in case you wish to do questions, we will ask you to use the menu that we have here at the Zoom platform. In the bottom bar, there is a Q&A button. Please push and pose your questions. We will be looking forward for this. And a second note, we have also multiple languages tool. You can use it. It's the first time in this networking Fridays that we are testing this platform, but I think it's going to be very useful for you. You can choose your own language. It's called interpretation in English, but there is a small globe with the world where you should push and select your language. So without further ado, Sergio today is going to present his presentation. It's a very interesting presentation about his work in marine ecosystems, regarding marine gardens and what he calls the natural engineers. We are all very much looking forward to your presentation. Let's have more or less 40-50 minutes of presentation, and after this we will have some discussion between the audience and Sergio. Sergio, thank you very much. The stage is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eduardo. Let me just share and then make a complete share of the screen. First of all, just 1 minute to say thank you very much to Jose Montiño to consider the work that we are, many people, the network that I'm working with is making and trying to put in the put in the hotspot of the European priorities. And thank you also, especially for Marcelo Soares and the director of the Labomar, Maria Osilea Menezes, and also the vice director, Lidiana Pinheiro, for all the effort that they made the last year to make this possible, because we met in Fortaleza, and that was really a pleasure and was a possibility to just make new contacts. I will try to explain what we are doing, what we are focusing in this decade of the oceans, because there are many things that are moving on, and except that we have this COVID-19 that is just making really problematic in many ways, especially from the human point of view, but also in the logistic point of view. This decade of the ocean that is starting in 2021 to 2030, in which the United Nations are also interested in this new Green Deal and in this new approach to nature. I want to just make an overview of what we are doing, but especially what we want to do. We are already working on this project, on this very huge project, but we have I really hope that this project is coming to an end and makes a very, very interesting point. These guys here are engineers, and as engineers that they provide solutions for society. they provide commodities for society, they provide things that are useful and tools that are useful for society. There are other kind of engineers that were described by Jones and collaborators in 1994, which are ecosystem engineers. Ecosystem engineers are those species which provide to other species some kind of commodities, some kind of services that can be used: shelter, food, change in hydrodynamics, and so on and so on. Trees are one of the examples of this kind of ecosystem engineers. But there are many others, like for example, the forest of the sea or the marine forest. This is a marine forest, a coral reef, in which the species that are bioconstructors, they also give these opportunities to other species, vigil species like fishes, crabs, but also plankton, to just have a more complex habitat that give them the opportunity to be more biodiverse and to close reproductive cycles and so on, as we will see. Marine forest, you know, for example, seagrass forest like Posidonia, for example, which is a very common and noble forest of the sea. We have this fantastic kelp forest also, but within all these forests that are very, very important in the shallow area in which the light is available for this autotrophic organism, there are other forests of the sea which are a little bit less known. This may be well known for everybody, is a shallow coral reef, in this case Alcyonariids, which also make a three-dimensional alive structure and are considered also ecosystem engineers, which is basically said the marine animal forest. Marine animal forests basically are all those habitats in which dominate suspension feeding organisms. Organisms that may be mixotrophic like autotrophy and heterotrophy is shared in the same organism. Like for example, scleractinians, some gorgonian sponges, or may be fully heterotrophic. In fact, for example, this is the main marine animal forest that all you know is the coral reef, which is extended in many places in shallow areas of tropical and subtropical seas. But you have to think that these marine animal forests are much more abundant below 50 meters depth. We have a splendorous marine animal forest all over the world that needs to be reconsidered and needs to be rediscovered. Yes, you have marine animal forests which can be considered like shrubs, for example, like this mussel bed, which also transform the hydrodynamics and make enhance biodiversity and make a direct impact on biogeochemical cycles. You have tropical coral reefs, like for example, this Caribbean coral tropical, and also other places, like for example, the mesophotic, which is going from the mesophotic coral reefs, which are going from 50 to 150 meters depth, approximately. Fantastic marine animal forests dominated basically by suspension feeding organisms. Below a certain point, of course, light is not more the driver. The driver is the heterotrophy. So these organisms, what they eat is all the suspended organic matter that can be alive or dead, detritus, phytoplankton, or zooplankton. This is in the Arctic. These are Arctic gorgonians near the Greenland. These are fantastic sponge grounds in Antarctica, in the continental platform, very huge, massive sponges that are in the continental shelf between 100 and 500 meters depth. Also in Antarctica, these splendorous gorgonian gardens that are there and were recently described during the last 25, 30 years were described and recently described also they rule in the trophical linkages and in the trophic ecology. You have also this Mediterranean marine animal forest. Of course, I have to talk a little bit about the Mediterranean, in this case, the Coralligenous, dominated by sponges, especially by gorgonians. One of the gorgonians is the emblematic red coral that you have also here, this splendorous animal that is spread all over the Mediterranean. between 10, 50 meters up to 800 meters depth, okay? And then you have one of the most splendorous marine animal forests all over the world that has been almost disappeared, that are all these marine animal forests which were in the continental platform, in soft bottoms, okay? Finally, you have this marine animal forest, which many of you are also used to know, and you are used to see, which is the cold water corals, which are widespread all over the world at depths between 100, 150, and more than 1,000 meters depth. So what I wanted to just to reflect a little bit about it is that the marine animal forest is a huge environment in which you may find practically a dominant biome in all the places which these suspension feeding organisms are dominating. This is, for example, shallow tropical coral reefs, which are only a few, less than 1% of the surface of the oceans, are dominated by these tropical coral reefs, but they generate a lot of biodiversity and biomass, respect other areas. But now the surprise is this. These 100,000 sea mountains, in which in many of them, there are cold water corals waiting for exploration, waiting to be described, waiting to understand what's their role in the overall cycle of the Earth. Recently, the UCN just put the marine animal forest as one of the biomes of the Earth. Okay, this is photo-limited marine animal forest. And we were discussing with UCN how to restrict this consideration, because as you may understand, the marine animal forest, if we consider all the places in which suspension feeding organisms are dominant, just think about it, but it's the most large biome on Earth, except, of course, the water column, which probably is the most in which there's the most abundance of life. But underwater, beneath the water, you have this kind of splendorous marine animal forest all over the world. Why the marine animal forests are so important? Marine forest in general. Now I will also talk about finite organs and, of course, about seaweeds, macroalgae, okay? Well, the first is because they are true barriers for hurricanes and storms in shallow areas. And probably most of you are thinking about coral reefs, shallow coral reefs. It's okay, but remember that, for example, Posidonia oceanica was also a real barrier for great easterly storms, for example, in the Mediterranean. These forests act as closing cycles of life of many organisms. The first stages of many organisms depend on this marine animal forest because they lay their eggs there, or just because the juveniles go there to go for shelter and for food. And of course, many organisms depend on the marine animal forest to be fed. And many species that are interesting from the commercial point of view, from the fisheries point of view, are also just in this kind of complex habitats. So fisheries depend largely, very largely on this kind of marine forest all over the world. They also transform the hydrodynamics. Don't miss that these organisms, this three-dimensional alive structure, intercept the currents and transform the turbulence. They retain particles, and they may be essential also for the concentration of determinate particles and nutrients. The forests are, of course, biodiversity hotspots, not only because many of these organisms represent a diversity. There may be this kind of marine forests which are monospecific, but they are also plurispecific marine animal forests and vegetal forest, but also because within this marine forest, there are several organisms inside. think about the Indonesian coral reefs, in which in 1 meter square, you may find more than 1,000 species without microbes. I'm talking also about metazoans and macroalgae. Okay, so 1,000 species per meter square is a lot. The complexity of this organism is giving this possibility to enhance the biodiversity. And of course, their nutrient cycling is another factor to be considered. They are cycling nutrients because they ingest food and they recycle this food and they excrete this food. Part of the ceston, considering the ceston, as I told before, the zooplankton, microphytoplankton, and detritus, the ceston that is recycling this with this species is really very, there's a large amount of this ceston and it's inside, and that can be recycled, and is an essential point to be also considered. And also, you have to take in mind that you are much more anthropocentrical if all these things which are much more ecological are not satisfying some people. Marine animal forests, not only for the fisheries, but also because the shallow ones are beautiful or maybe beautiful, and they concentrate life. They are really important as a tourist attraction. They are coral reefs in the coral region, in the Mediterranean. They attract lots of divers, which is an industry that is growing year by year. And finally, but it's not less important, these forests of the sea act as carbon immobilizers. They may be carbon sink, or they just will be immobilizing carbon. I will just explain this a little bit more to be clearer. Land forests, you know very well, are carbon sinks. Like, for example, this Amazonian forest, in which you may find 1 to 2 tons of carbon immobilized, fixed, sinked per hectare and per year. But other places, like for example, these salt marshes, may have up to 2-3 tons of this carbon immobilized in the structures and in the soil, of course. In some systems, much more in the soil than in the structures, in the living or dead structures. Okay, tons of carbon, 2-3 tons of carbon per square meter, per hectare and per year. Okay, and well, the process is quite easy to understand in this case. CO2 entered by photosynthesis, and part of this CO2 is transformed in a structural part of the system. So also in the sea, we will see that this forest of the sea maybe sinks, maybe a source of immobilization of this carbon, and are more and more and more important in our overall budget. We understand now that protecting this blue carbon, this so-called blue carbon, we will have more opportunities to just mitigate climate change. And this is a reality, and during the last 10, 20 years, this has been really evident. What about that? What about these organisms? What about the marine animal forest? Do we know something? We know something only for the coral reefs, and there is a debate, of course, and it's a close debate in some way, because they are not considered carbon sinks, they are considered carbon source because of this instantaneous point of view of this stoichiometric balance, in which enter this CO2 and transform in calcium carbonate, but there is also a release of CO2 in the system. There are other authors that say that part of the CO2 is retained in other ways. There are other authors that say that macroalgae, for example, and other organisms may take advantage of this CO2. The question is that all these organisms, especially the heterotrophic ones, which are dominant all over the world, they immobilize carbon. And this is unquestionable in the sense that once part of this carbon enters in the system, this carbon is immobilized, at least for a while. And this, we have to understand how much time is immobilized. Look, this is from the professor David Barnes. Is a chapter book, which is really nice. And I transformed to just make to understand what happens with all this. There is an algal bloom. This algal bloom is directly or indirectly eaten by the benthos, okay, in the form of phytoplankton, detritus, or zooplankton that eats the algal bloom. There's a benthic growth, and there is an immobilized carbon. The immobilized carbon will be this carbon that is in the structure. Also, we have to consider the sequestered carbon, which is this carbon that goes to the sediment and remains for millions of years or hundreds of thousands of years in the system. In any case, part of the carbon is immobilized, and in some cases, the immobilization may last for hundreds of thousands of years in the living structures of the organism. What's the problem? The problem is very simple. We have mapped only the 5% of the benthos. No. I know very well. I know very well that submarine canyons are well mapped. I know very well that reef drifts are very well mapped. Also, the continental platform. This 5% is respect the habitat construction, the habitat performance, the community. So what we don't know is what is there. We know the geological structure, but we are really ignorant about the real map of this forest of the sea. Both, probably the shallow forests are much more easy to reach, and then we have much more reliable maps, but below certain depth, 30, 40 meters, we don't have practically information about the real extension of this marine forest. And we have the tools. Look, this is an image treatment of 1 minute of video recorded by the Indemares project in the northeast of Spain. 1 minute video in which, as you see on the left, we can easily identify the gorgonians, and these gorgonians can be transformed and can be quantified as how much biomass they really represent in this area. So we do have the tools now to apply through ROVs, through ROVs, and through also scuba diving. Depending on the approach that they want to make, organism, population, community, or habitat ecosystem, we now have the tools to make this kind of approach. More importantly, we don't have only the tools to reach the communities through ROVs, which are much more cheaper, or ROVs, which are also cheaper. We have the software to apply and to make really nice maps. So what are the first things that we can do? One of the first things that we can just make is use our network. Is this what we are using, what we are trying to do? What we're trying to do is making a very huge network in which all these people share with us their images from different points of the planet, and then make a general approximation of all the marine animal forests that we have everywhere. Much of the points are in the Atlantic, as you see, and in the Mediterranean Sea. But every kind of collaboration is extremely very welcome, because we have huge gaps here. For example, in Eastern and Western Africa, for example, many parts of Asia, and also some parts of Australia and South America and North America. So we have still to enlarge this approach to make a very huge and nice map. To have all these fantastic marine forests and transform this in numbers of biomass and growth, because we also may know how much they grow, and then we may understand how much carbon they immobilize per year and per hectare, okay? The second thing that I want to just a bit of information for you is what we are doing. We are trying to understand what is happening with this marine animal forest now and what had happened. You all know which are the stressors of the marine animal forest and the marine forest in general. In the case of the marine animal forest, this is the main stressor. The main stressor is not only the warming, ocean acidification, sea level rise, it's bottom trawling. Bottom trawling has swept out the marine animal forest in many, many, many places of the world. Think about it. In 2002, two authors, Thrush and Dayton, described that 1/3 1/3 of the continental platform was bottom trawled each year in the planet. 2002, and we're data, of course, of 1990s. Just give to your imagination how much of this is bottom trawling now. So bottom trawling, if you want to have an image of this, this is a very nice image in which you will understand why bottom trawling has directly to be banned. I'm sorry about that, because I know that many fishery people will not be very happy with this kind of point of view, but bottom trawling is one of the first problems of the marine animal forest. The second, of course, and also of the marine forest in the sense, in a more general sense, is climate change. And climate change, of course, is also giving lots of problems. Warming and ocean acidification, this is just transforming the primary productivity. It's calculated that 15% of the productivity of the Northern Pacific has dropped during the last 16 years. This is almost 1% a year, not bad. And in many other places, similar studies and just arriving at this, they are arriving to the same point. The change in the fluxes of energy will be essential to understand the future of the forest of the sea. Like, of course, many other things, as you may understand. And yes, the bleaching, of course, is one of the most imminent problems that we have to solve, and we have to try to not only to understand, but also to fight. Trying to make other kind of policies, which in this very moment, the policies that we are applying all over the world are not enough to just protect the coral reefs. We all know that, and many other systems. And in some way, when I wanted to just clarify to you is that all these marine forests have been deeply transformed during the last centuries. It's not a new thing. What we are seeing now is a pale structure, is a pale complexity if we compare with these ancient times. Look at this. This is simple. This is a picture took in 1893, and the same picture, the same zone in 1994. Just, I don't have to discuss it a lot. I think it's evident and is published in several papers, this kind of approach. But now I want you to see the next picture, which could be very interesting. I present this picture to all my students all over the world. I teach with this picture in Spain, I teach with this picture in Brazil, and also, of course, in Italy. This picture is an 18th century picture in the north of Sicily. And of course, I cannot ask you what you see, and I will tell you immediately. But to my students, I just asked them, what do you see here, which is abnormal? And the first thing is the massive quantity of very big red coral that these guys are taking. This is the first thing that you see, these big branches of red coral. The second thing that is even more amazing for me is that these guys go in apnea, free diving. So they don't have tanks, they don't have anything. They just, with the breath and with no weight, with no specific weight, they arrived to take these large colonies, which were probably at 5, 7, 10 meters depth. So this is what happened. This is a red coral from the Catalan coast, just in the 1970s. And this one is the coral that you find now in the same place. We pass from a tree forest to a grassland, and this is everywhere for many, many forests of the sea. We have to think that we are losing an ally to fix, to immobilize this carbon. I will fix the idea of this carbon immobilization to don't disperse completely my talk about other ecosystem services. Please, just 10 seconds to see this huge and fantastic colony and these other very small colonies that we find now. So what we can do many things. What we are trying to do is restore the sea, but in an extremely serious, with an extremely serious plan. It's not only transplantation or small restoration, but happened during the last 20 years, 25 years. We were making a very nice work, very, very profitable work with transplantation and optimization of this kind of restoration, these restoration programs. Now we have to understand that we have to, in some way, be gardeners of the sea. We have to transform ourselves in gardeners of the sea. How we can do that? The first thing that we may do is just think that many of these organisms, the marine animal forest in this case, may need a suitable surface to develop. We can do transplantations, of course, in bare rocks. We can do these transplantations also in other places. But if we just enhance through specific structures thought for the organism will be in some way happy to be there, because we understand that the structure is prepared to optimize the suitability for this organism, the settlement, by the currents, but by the particle retention, trying to understand also how it affects the hydrodynamics, etc., etc. If we make this kind of approach in areas in which we have already deserts of the sea, actively transplanting organisms, and of course waiting also for the passive settlement of the organisms, we may be very, very successful. In some way, it's a participatory process. What we understood is that this process cannot be, in any case, a single academic project. This has to be a participatory process. And as I will tell you in just 2 minutes, in a couple of minutes, this is or could be a very profitable process from the economic point of view. Because what we are trying to do is just make an educational and awareness program that makes the divers and the people that is outside the sea participate in this kind of transplantation, making something like a economically attractive part in some way, in which you have all these structures that will be gardened by the divers. So step by step, this is not immediate. In several years, you will have the opportunity to garden with the last methods of transplantation, but also take into account the ecological needs of the organism and of the habitat, which will be the best way to recover and to make a real oasis, from which you can just amplify the spillover of the vagal and the sessile organisms around. This is the main idea. To just be clear, from this kind of bare structure, which is adapted to the single needs of the organism, to a completely colonized, both passively in some way because of the drifting of the larvae of propagus and etc., but also of the active transplantation. In this active transplantation, of course, we consider the patch structure of the community, the patch structure of the population, optimization of the biodiversity, and so on and so on. To be clear, here you have 2 main, let us say, areas: the land area in white and the blue area, which is the ocean or the coastal area in blue. In the blue area, you make the artificial reefs, this kind of specific reefs, which you have the opportunity to make the transplantation. Of course, you also make seaweed and seagrass transplantation too, with the last methods, not with the transplantation, for example, through seedling or through the last methods. You also have a monitoring program in which people participate, and you also have the possibility to make other kinds of activities, like, for example, multi-trophic aquaculture, or you even can think to make a serious deep water reef transplantation programs, which we are making in our project. The benefits from the economical point of view. The first is make a base of long-term monitoring, environmental and biological, which is extremely needed to understand how local and global impacts are affecting our populations. Making, of course, an active garden with the latest methods. This also will enhance the industry of the transplantation, enhancing this kind of methods, and just stimulating this kind of work. Also for seaweeds and seagrasses, I never forget this. We calculated that, for example, for finite organs only, you have 6 tons of carbon per year and per hectare, okay? Within our calculations, the combination of the seaweeds or seagrasses, depending on the area, and the artificial structures will be more or less from 1 to 3 tons of carbon per hectare and per year, which is not bad if you compare with Amazonian, which is 1, with salt marshes, which is 2, 3, and with sea grasses, which are up to 6 tons of carbon. So you can, in some way, have credits of carbon through this kind of restoration. But you have more things, in carbon immobilization. You may have more things apart of the immobilization of this carbon, which may be trade in some way and may be easily reachable to the people through this program of engagement. You also may look for emblematic species. You may also look to have suitable environments for groupers, for lobsters, and for sharks, or for other organisms which may have or may be more in some way happy in determinate areas in which the biodiversity is enhanced. You can make specific programs for vulnerable species, like for example, the red coral in the Mediterranean. And why not? We are also talking with people and is making integrated multi-trophic aquaculture to cultivate algae, bivalves, sponges, and also other organisms, not only fishes, which is the most profitable, but it's also the more explored and the most costly in terms of energy and of money, aquaculture facilities, to make this kind of combination in the places in which there will be this kind of artificial reefs. And of course, this is also last but not least, promoting the local artificial fisheries and the local participation. This is essential for us. This is enhancing the possibility to produce more biomass, which will be available for the local people, okay? And how we just manage all this with a land zone, with an area which will be placed on land, in which we will have a biolab. The biolab will be a place in which we are just teaching and making participate the people to the experiments, manipulation, etc., etc., but also to make new experiences of transplantation, monitoring, etc. At nursery grounds, in which we will have all these corals that are or will be, but also gorgonian sponges and so on, that will be reared to be transplanted by the people, by the single diver in a continuous program. And of course, education and awareness, to say motivation, and to do that, to make this kind of awareness, to make this kind of approach of motivation, which is essential to respect the sea, to see what is there in the oceans and make definitively the step to make the oceans our own house, which is not in this very moment, we may have all this complex functioning. So at the end, you have all this picture in which you will have this switch between land and the ocean, in which you will have the opportunity to be a garden of the sea and to take advantage not only of the educational awareness, but especially also to make flourish the local economy through this kind of restoration program. Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you very much, Sergio. Very interesting, inspiring, insightful, beautiful presentation. It was really amazing, delightful. We have many questions here for you, and also people are also giving a lot of comments about your presentation. It was very pleasing and well, very all good comments that you can imagine. If the audience allows me, since I am here in the first place, I also have some questions, and we maybe can start with these, and then while we wait for some other questions. So first one is regards perception. How do you think, if you can describe, how do you describe the perception that decision makers have right now and nowadays about the importance of these natural engineers and the importance of all these ecosystems that you have been describing, and even more in the particular case of these deep sea cases? How do you, what's your idea about the perception that our leaders have about this right now? It's a personal.
Very poor, extremely poor. We don't know what we don't see. And if we are making what we are doing in other places in which we are just burning trees and just making these big fires on land forest, imagine those forests in which you don't see the forest. I think that the ocean in general, and in particular this marine forest, both vegetal and animal, are just used. They are just used. But bottom trawling is the example, in the sense that, well, it's okay, it's there. I know that it's there, but I don't care. I think that
it's the best that we can do. Well, it's a long question, and several people have been trying to answer to this. But what do you think is the most effective way to increase this awareness, or how do you see any solution for this?
There are two things. The first, it makes a serious, from my point of view, is make a serious restoration program in the way in which you engage people. And then from the people that is just kids to old people can be engaged and can see the ocean, can see the marine animal forest, the Posidonia, and so on, but see in a direct way, not only in documentals or through the television, but they just participate to grow up something first. And the second is make a map. Is make a map. Imagine a Google Earth in which you have the map, and you don't only have the relief of the map, which is fantastic. Please don't get me wrong, but you just put inside the water in this Google map, and you can see the forest of this sea from this kind of approaches in which you have this software that makes you free in this kind of area, so you can swim through and see really what it is. Because the problem is that the Google Earth, you can go to India, you can go to Mali, you can go to Spain, and you can see many things. But when you go to the oceans, you only see the relief of the geological structure, which is fantastic, but it's not enough.
Yeah, I see. Well, basically a geographical information system that is interactive and allows people to realize that sometimes we are impacting things and we don't know what's there, but if they can see it and if they can feel it, even if it's remotely, they can relate to it, and we cannot.
And it's possible because now we have all the tools, and we have to invest it. We have to invest money in that, in the oceans. Yeah,
that's right. Another question, very quick. How much of the blue carbon do you think nowadays we can account for? Or do you think it's, or how accurate is our global estimate about the real blue carbon, the entire blue carbon in the planet?
The blue carbon in the planet, the only blue carbon that we know, and we have some reliable numbers, is phanerogam's, seaweeds in some way, but not very much. Now recently rhodolites, but also starts to be not very precise, and mangrove salt marshes. From this, which are the shallower, we do have some numbers, and we know that is very important. That is, they are really retaining a lot, even 5 times more respect those which are on land. So it's not bad. So you have on land at least 1 ton of carbon sink in the Amazonian forest, for example, and you have up to 6 tons in the seagrasses. Seagrasses are like this, okay, and have all the sediment around. The trees of the Amazonian is tens of meters. So just give you the idea that probably the amount is really large. But, and this is also important, and all the other forests of the sea, which are gorgonian sponges, corals, bryozoans, ascidians, I don't know. I don't have the number. This is one of the things that I want to do because I don't have the number.
But we have the tools, right? So
yes,
just we need the will and the investment. So last question in 2 parts, because we have other questions, many interesting questions. How much time do you think it takes to develop underwater garden project? So just to give an idea, if you start the project today and start putting things in the field, I know it may change depending on the species that you're targeting or other variables, but how much time people would expect to have or to wait until they have the full project developed? And second part of this question, which types of monitoring would you suggest as critical for this type of underwater gardens?
The first underwater gardens, I think that in 2-3 years you have truly results because you are making active transplantation. So in 2-3 years, if well managed, and I think we have the tools to do it very well, you will have a real, how can I say, a real patch or several patches in which you combine different species, you combine different possibilities. Then you just wait for these species to grow and continue transplanting and transplanting up to you have your garden. In 2-3 years, you have for sure a garden, but then you have to leave the garden grow depending on the growth rate of the species on the one side. On the other side, and then your question is very good in this sense because people is making the monitoring, of course, guided by technicians and marine biologists, marine geologists, marine physicists, which is people that is, of course, experts, and this is also a source of work, which are making this kind of approach, but the people this is the awareness project because they don't go there and just, no. They also see what happens with the temperature, what happens with the pH, what happens, for example, with the concentration of plankton, what happens with the growth of these organisms. They actively monitoring these areas and they return. The idea is that the divers, for example, go with the family and go and return 2 years after return because they are growing a garden and they are growing a structures that are just there waiting for you to see what is happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very interesting concept. Now you have the gardens in the cities, right? And the community gardens, people go there and they cultivate and it works quite nice. It's good for the people, it's good for the environment, and it also creates this engagement. I think it's very important. Thank you for your replies. Let's take some questions from the audience. I will start with Push Bajaj. I hope it's the correct pronunciation. He's calling and he's asking Dr. Rossi. Rossi, please, could you share your thoughts on scientific attempts to artificially enhance the resilience of marine ecosystems? And with this question, he means introducing heat-resistant corals or fertilizing oceans with iron. So what's your thoughts on this? And could these measures help in protecting these vulnerable ecosystems? Last part of the question, any unintended consequence of this type of approach that you could see? So what's your vision about this?
Really, really good, very excellent question. Very complex, really very complex. Okay, yes. Because we are gardening the sea, we have to match with the problem. The problem is that we have climate change. Because we have climate change, it's not only gardening, but it enhances those species which may be more resistant to, for example, water warming, to the warming of the water column. And is this why it's essential also to understand what will happen? Is this why I introduced this small part, very few minutes, in which I say, guys, these are the problems that we have with climate change, which are extremely complex and not easy to. But as the person just asked, for example, iron fertilization, well, yes, I mean, we have to study what will be the best way to do this kind of, many of the tools are already ready to be applied, many of them. Other has to be explored. Is this why it's good, the interaction between the scientific staff, also the local people, see what happened during the last 10, 20, 30, 50 years to the system and create the oasis in base of new methods. One thing that is really important, and this is for everyone, we will never reach the same point that we have 100 years ago. Sorry about that. We have to face a new reality in which we will be the responsibles for the complexity, for the biomass, for the interaction of the organisms. It's horrible to say that, but it's one of the possibilities that we have to seriously think, or make nothing, only protected areas, which are fantastic. But remember that when we had these bleaching events in Australia, marine protected areas, of course, worked very well, but with these bleaching events, was not enough to reach the point of survivorship.
Yeah, this is very important. So Bajaj also has another question, and I will go right through it. It's important because it complements. While he asks, while conservation efforts such as establishing marine protected areas could help in protecting against pollution and over-exploitation, it will likely not help in protecting against long-term warming of the oceans or acidification. How can we protect these ecosystems? This is also very challenging, from long-term physical and chemical changes in the oceans due to climate change.
So what we have to think is that, of course, the problem is very simple at the end. We have to change everything. We are doing it bad. We are doing it bad. So
that we can...
Of course, if we reach the 2.0 degrees centigrades, the mean in the next 30, 40, 50 years, coral reefs will, as we understand, as we know them, they will disappear, practically disappear. Only 5% probably in the more septentrional and also in the more meridional areas will survive. Then they will be transformed in other things that we still don't know exactly. Okay. Marine protected areas are essential, but not enough, in the sense that we have to go one step beyond, and we have to try to make more connectivity between these areas in areas that are not so protected, but we can restore. So the idea is, imagine that you have a very big, huge protected area here, huge protected area here, and we have a not protected area here, which is barely sand, and we can put this kind of structures, and we can just try to restore the system and make connectivity between the areas, and enhance biodiversity. It's a possibility, but you are right. It's not so easy, in the sense that we have still to run against time to understand which will be the best, let us say, ecosystem engineer species that will be that will resist the next coming. They are now just working on the marine system,
right? Yeah. Okay, good. Another question, very interesting one also, from Elva Escobar. She's not with us anymore. She had to leave, but she asks for an answer, and we can leave the answer here in the question and answers. She greets you for the great talk, and she asks, what makes forests in terms of size? Is it possible to define the size that defines what is a forest on the sea floor? Second part of the question, can sargassum be considered as a floating forest by its extension and function? This is the question.
Well, the forest, I mean, when we just coined this term, what we wanted is not and I have to really honest about that, it's not an ecosystem approach in the sense of a very straight, narrow. No, we say, okay, guys, we have to just bring the attention to these habitats and to these communities which are not so well represented, and we have to just put all them together with knowing that they are very different from each other, okay? And of course, we just said, well, we started to see that with the umbrella of this marine animal forest, in which are suspension feeding dominated communities, we may have this umbrella. But forests of the sea are also seagrass and seaweeds, and they are already described as sea forests in many papers and in many forums, and also in projects and calls from the European Union. So we just took advantage of that. And well, this is why we just say the forest of the sea, and how we can just define. Then you can state the definition of the different forest of the sea, dominated by gorgonians, dominated by sponges, or mixed between calcareous algae and gorgonians, and so on and so on.
Very good. Another question, very interesting, from Lowell Iporak, regarding the shape of the structures. How do you have any criteria to define the shape of these structures? Should them be more geometric or more organic, asymmetrical? Is there any criteria that we can use to design these structures?
The structures are defined by the organisms that you want to, that you want to favor, that you want to have more suitable. For example, if you want to make structures that are more suitable for lobsters, which are, of course, not marine animal forests, but are vaginal organisms, which are interesting also you make part of the structure that will be suitable for these organisms. If you want to enhance, for example, photophilic organisms, you will find the structure that will be more, how can I say, well, that will be more optimized for these organisms. So the structure is in function of the community and on the single organism, depending on what you want to. If you want, for example, a gorgonian forest, you will try to make the structure that will be suitable for the hydrodynamics, that is the forest, the light, if it's light dependent or not light dependent, the turbulence that can be in the area, and so on and so on. So the size could be small, like for example, half a meter, you know, a structure that can be 50 centimeters, or can be extremely huge, can be also meters. To make walls, to make tunnels, to make things that are also thought for the people. Because this is a mix. The people that is working on this kind of structures are architects. And they are thinking about the organism, but they are also thinking about the real pleasure to see these structures. So it's a mix between the beauty and the functionality of the structure.
And how about the materials that we use?
The materials, we used to work before with, well, with cement, but this is not very good. It's not a very good idea, because cement has many problems of pH, as many people will know. These artificial structures has to be thought about other materials. The other materials, we are just making proofs now and studying other materials, but the cement is much more cheaper. But we have to think that the cement is not the best way to make this structure. So, for example, some calcium carbonate, conglomerates, or something like that is what we are also looking for.
Okay, so another question, if you still are with us. I'm having some troubles with the connection. I hope you can hear me. Ligia Colado Vives, she greets you for the great talk, and she asks if you can elaborate a little more on restoration and how to deal with the water quality and all the stressors that are behind the die-off of seagrass beds or coral reefs. How do you think we can aggressively work on water quality? What do you think of doing this work?
Very nice question, because this is a very nice question, because what we are doing, for example, here in the south of Italy, one of the professors that is now leading one of the main projects of the Università del Salento, which is Professor Adriana Giangrande, she's doing a very nice project about integrated multi-trophic aquaculture, in which they are using filter feeders and also macroalgae to clean the water of the fish cage facilities, and it's working. They are cleaning the water. So you can also clean the water with these structures, also combine it with multi-trophic aquaculture. Why not? You also can create biomass that can be harvested. Why not? We are doing that. We are just thinking about the whole thing, not only the restoration part, in which, no. We are thinking about the whole thing, and part of the project, depending on the area, may be directed to just enhance the filter feeding organisms, and those organisms which are taking dissolved nutrients, like, for example, the macroalgae. So yes, the question is that we want to restore areas in which these forests have been disappearing during the last decades, and try to make a much more complex habitat through this organism.
Very good. Very brief answer for Jerry Miller. He asks if you have an idea of the ratio between the weight of blue economy and, for instance, oil and gas industry. What's the importance of blue economy? Do you have an idea about this briefly?
No, I don't have it. I have to be honest, and I know that if you, if he's asking how we will be just substituting one for the other, I'm not sure. If the question is, we can enhance these structures to just a little bit buffer the problem of the emission of gases, well, I suffer from the beginning. This is a mitigation project, but one of the things that we have to do, a part of all these fantastic projects, is try to change substantially our way of life. And we know that all of us, we know that. So we can mitigate, and we can just make this kind of trade-off. But for sure, what we have to do is just try to consume less.
Very good. Okay, so another question from João Lorenzetti. Structures at the bottom in some of the marine forests that would make trawling in the area impossible by entangling fishing nets. This is a possible approach?
Yes. One of the things that we are thinking is in deep sea, in continental shelf, continental platform, and also in deep sea, because we are also working on this approach of restoration of the deep sea. The idea is to make structures and also a system in which bottom trawling is completely, is banned. The idea is this. The idea is just we have had to. In 2009, I was in a congress in which we have the possibility to see, and they say the possibility to see that bottom trawling will be banned. 2009, I remember very well, and saying one of the persons who was talking was really sure that will be banned bottom trawling, but bottom trawling was not banned at all. So we continue with bottom trawling, and we continue just with this huge perturbation of the bottom. How can I say? Well, we continue to do that, or we just ban bottom trawling. To do that, also this kind of structures may be useful. Also, they can be thought to be part of the solution for bottom trawling.
Yeah. This is all very difficult, right? So another question that we have here from WhatsApp. Any examples of deep sea forests that you can think of that are more important? Can, for example, hydrothermal vents life be considered as a dark marine forest? Well,
yes. Very nice. This question is very good. In fact, in the last book that is about to be published now in autumn, the second book about the marine animal forest, there is one, which is the marine animal forest, biodiversity hotspots, which has been published in 2017. And now it comes, the 2020, now comes the second one, in which also hydrothermal vents are described as marine animal forest by Veronica Tudifeco of Canada. And it's fantastic because she understood the concept immediately and said, yes, I will bring a chapter about hydrothermal vents demonstrating that these are also marine animal forests that are very deep and also very interesting and very different.
Yeah, that's a good answer. Another question from Mark Garcia Duran. If you, can explain a little further about Underwater Gardens' vision in terms of how the business model allows for taking care of nature. And very profitable. So mostly looking at how this business can become very profitable investment for both private and public stakeholders, so that maybe we can use these arguments to bring more people into the board, right? How do you see the key points? Yeah.
Exactly. In fact, all this idea of joining the academic part and the more practical part to the business plan and also to the awareness was first made by Underwater Gardens. And the vision of the Underwater Gardens is just trying to make this bridge between the two sensibilities about, the world, which is the more academic and more theoretical and the more practical. And in some way, making this practical very attractive to the business solutions. So what they really are doing is just making this approach of awareness a business. In some way, what they are doing is a very, very, very good way to just respect nature, making nature-based solutions, make restoration plans, but on the other side, be also very, very profitable for the local areas, for the local people. This is why, just what I was describing, I was insisting in this local communication, this local awareness, and this local participation. Not only from the point of view of what is in the sea and how beautiful are the oceans, but especially to enhance local economies through a very, very participative process.
Yeah, thank you for your answer. So I've been trying to select some of the representative questions that we have here, because we have many questions. In any case, we will try to reply to them all even after the session, but we are a little over the schedule already, like almost 15 minutes. There is one more question I find curious. Maybe you have an idea, because you showed a picture where people in the 18th century was collecting red corals from the Mediterranean. And the question is, do you have an idea about why were they collecting these corals at that time? Was it for making jewelry or for medical purposes? This is a curiosity, right? It's just an extension of your presentation.
Basically jewelry. The red coral industry is very ancient. I mean, the first red corals were from the Paleolithic, and you find in the Roman Empire a lot of coral, trade of coral. You find it in the Middle Ages, and you have many cities that were just making this, especially jewelry, but also homeopathic, and also for amulets and things like that. In that very moment, the red coral was a very profitable business. In the beginning of the 19th century, Torre del Greco took the torch and made this concentration of the red coral of the Mediterranean known sea in that very moment. And they make an industry with something like 1,200 boats and tens of thousands of people working for this kind of industry. So yes, the harvesting was to make this kind of collars, earrings, sculptures. The sculptures are beautiful, and so on and so on. Yes, I have to say one thing that has to be clarified too, because people sometimes are a little, I mean, this kind of structures of the sea are thought to be gardened. So it is very interesting to understand that has not to be a pointless thing in which you just put the structures, what we have been making, put the structures and that's all. And this, in particular, this underwater garden solution is trying to make this possible through the time. Not only a punctual thing in which you put your structures, but making a real participative process. Without this process, this restoration plans has no meaning. And another thing, this kind of restoration of the seas, and this the European Union has understood very well, is also meaningful, has no meaning if you do it locally, only in one place, putting 3 structures. You have to do a very brave and very large system in which you make this kind of approach in many places, where you can clone, you can make a clonage of the project in many areas of the world.
Well, one last question. This is maybe not so easy also, but what's your vision, let's say, if we can travel 100 years ahead, what's your vision about what's going to be the future of oceans in general? Do you think that's going to, well, what would be the presence of natural environments, completely natural, and the presence of artificial environments? How will these artificial environments be? How will humans interact with the ocean in this very distant future? How do you see this also in the context of your research and what you're doing?
I love a paper that says that all the restoration plans that we have has to be thought for the next decades or centuries. This is what we should do now. So the real results, the success will be to interact with nature and to, in some way, help nature to survive to all the transformation, let us say in this way. If we don't want to be catastrophic and say destruction, we say transformation, not only on land, but also on the seas. So what I see is that there need to be a human, there needs to be a human, not only sit and wait. We can do that, of course, and say, no, because climate change is, no, because, okay, this is a way to do the things. The other way is, of course, mitigate climate change, because this is the must. If we don't do that, many things will be dramatically changed and not for good. And the other is try to enhance, to push the process to be more effective. So this is the idea of this gardening of the sea, is just push all this to be really good for the environment and good for the people. And of course, also to be aware in some way that the people is just making the sea, the oceans, part of them. Because as I understood, as far as I understood during the last decades, we still ignore the oceans. And I say always, we still ignore the oceans, we still ignore the oceans, and we're still ignoring the oceans. So,
do you think it's going to happen something like happened in land, right? With the farming, will we be farming oceans the way we are farming land right now?
More respectful, not, for example, these monocultures of aquaculture, which are done, I mean, some of them are very, very bad for the environment. We will understand that integrated multi-trophic aquaculture, combined with restoration, combined with conservation and natural areas and so on, with different kinds of fisheries that are more respectful with the sea, will be the future to make this exploitation. I hope that this message arrives during this decade. If it doesn't arrive during this decade, I think we will have serious problems. We are making this kind of approach with these restoration programs. We are now making the Canary Islands. We are also trying to see what happens also in Fortaleza in Brazil. We are also looking at the area of Mauritius, which also needs a huge program now that they have been beaten. They have been by this oil spill. We are trying to develop this project in these 3 areas, but we are open to many other areas in which they need this kind of approach.
Well, Sergio, I think we already exhausted our time. I hope everybody enjoyed this. I enjoyed a lot all this discussion. You bring a lot of very innovative ideas. You bring a lot of hope to all of us. Thank you for bringing us the presentation and all this discussion. Thank you again to Air Center to provide us all this, to provide the logistics and to connect the people. And thank you everyone for having us, for participating. Keep in touch. We are here. We can contact Sergio anytime. And see you next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all of you. And the presentation, I think it will be available. And then the presentation is in the last slide that I didn't show, is the email if you want to contact me to share ideas. I think, guys, I know that we are in a big mess, but
it's on our hands, right?
It's in our hands. I mean, it's in our hands. Thank you very much to the center. Thank you, Eduardo. It was a pleasure, a really pleasure. It was fantastic. Really.
Very good. Very good. Thank you, Sergio. Thank you. See you next time.
Thank you.